Moving on to self-regulation, this is another way to think about the volition idea that we have talked about, but self-regulation includes things like behavior control and the idea that there are certain standards that we take into consideration. Um, One way to think about this is trying to convince ourselves to do one thing and while at the same time convincing ourselves not to do another thing, right? So I think the classic way to maybe conceptualize this is having like two little voices inside your head. One's, pushing you towards your goals, keep you in line with goal pursuit, and the other one's just kind of more like, nah, take a break. It's okay to relax a bit, and just leading you in a different direction. So two voices each leading in a different direction, and that overall kind of encompasses self-regulation. So we'll talk about this with a few different in a few different areas here. First with emotions, and with thoughts and performance, and finally with strategies. So with regulating emotions, again, I mentioned standards. So we have a standard for emotions that we want to get our emotional states to. Typically, we want more positive affective states. This isn't always the case, though, right? If something is going on, like a funeral or something like that, then a more of a negative affective state is going to make sense. But typically, we want a positive affective state. The thing is that these positive states are very hard to maintain. And so that's where certain self-regulation strategies come in to try and maintain these more positive mood states, because that's difficult to do. And just think of the last time something good happened to you. Maybe, I don't know, you got an A on a test, you got a car, or I don't know, whatever is important to you that you felt good about. That certainly increases positive affective state for a certain amount of time, right? But then, I mean, even with people who win the lottery, there are some studies that show that they will eventually return to a certain affective state. And so, this is the idea of the hedonic treadmill, where people return to a certain set point. So, even if something really good happens and you feel happy about it, it is hard to maintain that. So, in terms of a treadmill, right, maybe something happens and it gets you to run really fast, but in terms of like movement towards a positive affective state, it's kind of running in place, right? So, that's the idea. Um, it's just really hard to stay up here in that positive area. Interestingly, an effect of positive mood is that it leads to greater creativity than a neutral or a negative mood. And so there are two explanations for why that might be, and we'll talk about this throughout the rest of this lecture. And so the first is mood congruency. So this idea or theory gets at that positive mood state helps with just broader thinking. So if we're happy in a better mood, then we should be able to think more broadly, and the opposite for a negative mood. And additionally, then being in a positive mood is congruent with thinking of positive things. So more positive things are brought to mind. It's easier to think of these positive things. And if we are in a negative mood, the other approach is called the hedonic contingency model. And with this model, this gets at that in order to creativity is basically used as a strategy in order to maintain a positive mood. So a self-regulation strategy, right? Um, and so for what I'll show on the next slide is that just kind of a visual example of how it's maybe more difficult to maintain a positive mood, in terms of with our yeah, it's just more difficult to maintain a positive mood. And so therefore, we need to be more creative when thinking of ways to improve our affect when we're already in a positive mood, right? Versus when we're in a negative mood, that might be a little bit easier. And so I'll show that here. So just think about this. We have negative, like a negative mood or feelings, and also negative range of information and activities that we can engage in on the left side here. And on the right side, we have highly positive mood and more neutral in between. And so if you're on this negative side of things, right, there are a lot of options for increasing your positivity, because I mean, even if you're over here on the left side, where a negative is, even something that's neutral is going to improve that, right? Versus if you're on this positive side, there's not a whole lot more that you can do to maintain or increase that positive mood. And so therefore, it takes more creativity in order to find ways to keep that positive mood. And that's this idea of the hedonic contingency model. And so, someone who's in a very positive mood might even try to avoid neutral things or things that might bring mood down, like the news or something of that nature. And so, this I'm going to go over a study that includes it's what's called a generation task, and this is going to get at results that present evidence for one of these two theories that we talked about and evidence against the other. So again, we have mood congruency, and then we have the hedonic contingency model. So basically in this study, you can watch this video if you want. It's just a quick funny clip, but basically some video clips were used to get participants into either a positive, neutral, or sad mood state. And so this one is for Miss Doubtfire. It was used to get someone into a more of a positive mood state. But once participants were then in that mood state, they completed a generation or creativity task. And they're put into one of two conditions, where basically in both conditions, didn't matter which one for this, they're given a category, and their job was to think of as many examples as possible for that category. So in the first, it was modes of transportation. Just think of as many as you can. There are some that are pretty easy to think of, not too creative, right? Like buses, cars, bikes, things like that. But then there are also some more creative ones, like hot air balloons or riding a camel or something like that. The other condition did a very similar thing, but for causes of death. And so obviously you can kind of get at the similar thing here, where you can, an individual could think of more or less causes of death in another individual. And some of those reasons for death might be more creative than others. But with this is a negative topic, right? So if mood congruency is the answer to why positive mood leads to more creativeness, then happy people should do well with this condition, the modes of transportation, but not with the causes of death, because that's more depressing, right? That's going to get them into more of a negative mood state, and it would be incongruent with their current state after that video. Here is what the results show. So overall, these results present evidence for the hedonic contingency model. More generations were made for those who are inducted into more of a happy state, for both the modes of transportation and for causes of death, and especially for causes of death here, that was the case. So again, that's evidence against the mood congruency model here. Additionally, what's not shown is that not only did those in a happy state just generate more examples for each category, they also came up with more original or creative examples, such as in this death condition, they would think of examples that could be considered deaths that would be, you might see in a cartoon or something, then and that would be more likely than a death that would actually happen in real life. versus those who were inducted into more of a sad state were more likely to think of maybe less creative examples of death, but those that are more probably realistic, such as cancer or other depressing causes of death like that. This study has pretty interesting methods, I think, here. So mood freezing, it's another just example of a study that gets at this similar idea of trying to answer the why question for positive mood and creativity. And so what they did in the study was they convinced people that an aroma candle could freeze their mood. So whatever state they were in when they smelled this candle, that's what it was going to stay in, and it wouldn't change for a certain amount of time, and it would be actually impossible to change their mood. And then there was a control condition where people were told, this is just a candle. And I mean, it is just a candle, right? It's not, people were actually convinced of this, but it wasn't the case that it actually freezes mood. But the important part is that they were convinced. And this mood freezing thing is important for this research because the inability to change mood should eliminate mood regulation strategies like creativity, right? So then that would be evidence against the hedonic contingency model. And the results here, number generated, we see that in the control condition, it's what we would expect, right? Where they were told it was just a candle. Those in a happy mood state were more likely to come up with more examples similar to that first study I talked about. However, the mood freeze eliminated these results. And so the evidence that this would have presented against the hedonic contingency model wasn't there, suggesting, again, like in the first study, that it's not just mood that brings certain information to mind, like mood congruency would suggest, but that the creativity is used as actually a self-regulation or emotion regulation strategy to maintain one's positive mood. Interestingly, also similarly to the first study, this wasn't found in just the number of examples written down. It was also found in measures of flexibility and originality. So again, like for thinking of modes of transportation, riding a camel would be probably more of an original or creative answer than riding a bus or driving a car or something like that. Finally, one last application study here is how we eat to feel better. And so this gets at the idea of comfort foods, right? And this study, I think, shows just what we might think would happen is that basically what they did is that they inducted mood or influenced mood by telling one of two stories. In one story, a child dies in an accident. So obviously that leads to a negative or a distressed mood state. And in the other condition, the child is rescued, and that leads to a happier, much happier mood state. And then what was measured is they told the participants they're just gonna try some various foods. What the participants didn't know is that how much these snacks were weighed beforehand so they could tell how much was eaten in these taste testings. And what was found was that distressed people ate more of these snacks when they thought that when they weren't told that mood was frozen. So in other words, they did this, they ate more snacks when they thought that eating more of these tasty foods would improve mood. And the exact opposite here, right? Like those in a negative mood didn't really eat much at all when they were told that the mood was frozen and wouldn't change. So there's a little bit more evidence. Overall, it seems like the evidence points pretty strongly towards this hedonic contingency model, or in other words, evidence towards an emotion regulation strategy that we use. And that's why creativity certainly isn't the only way that we can try and get at maintaining a positive mood. There are other ways we do this as well, but this is certainly one of them. And that's it for this lecture. Next, we'll get into regulating some thoughts and regulating performance as well.